you.
I love what you do. What you and Dara do is so amazing.
Oh, thank you, Michael. That means so much coming from you.
Great.
Hi, everybody. So we're live now. I will give it a minute for some folks to join, but my name is Kayla Wall. I am part of the Calm Collective today, or in general, we formed during the COVID crisis, and we're speaking today about the non-traditional media landscape. So we'll give it just a moment for some folks to connect. But thank you guys for joining us, and thanks to the panelists. I really appreciate your time today.
Thanks for asking us.
Excited to be here.
For having us, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Fun topic.
So,
I'm excited.
Yeah, it's something I talk about with a lot of our friends and you guys before, and I would love to bring it to a larger audience. So just to introduce you guys and to introduce myself, my name is Kayla Wall. I am the co-founder of Wall von Enck, which is a New York public relations firm that specializes in lifestyle and home design. I will be moderating today's panel on behalf of Calm Collective. And like I said earlier, for those of you who are unfamiliar, Calm Collective is a group of communications professionals who strengthened our connections with one another during a time of global change. So over the past 5 weeks, we've been generating constructive, authentic conversations within our community. So to start off introducing today's guest, we have Michael Boudreau. Michael's the host of the new Cherish podcast. He's an advisor to the Design Leadership Network, as well as a luxury brand consultant. And Michael was once the editor-in-chief of Elle Decor and Martha Stewart Living. So thank you for joining us. Next, we have Anna Logan. Anna is an editor at One Kings Lane, where she manages the brand's editorial calendar and writes weekly stories for the blog. And Anna was previously an editor at Traditional Home magazine, which is where we first met. And then we have Meeghan Truelove. Meeghan is the executive editor at The Bulletin. That's Schumacher's in-house publication. She has held editorial roles at Hearst Design Group, Metropolis, Travel and Leisure, and Meeghan's been at Schumacher for 5 years now, which is when she first oversaw the production of the very first Bulletin, and now she's working on the 11th volume. And then we have Eddie Ross, who is the co-founder and creative director of Maximalist Studio, a Pennsylvania-based photography studio, event venue, and prop house. Eddie has a reoccurring guest column in House Beautiful magazine and was previously an editor at Southern Living, Martha Stewart Living, Better Homes and Gardens, House Beautiful, and Food Network. So Eddie, how is your house, Edgewood Hall? How is it coming along?
It's coming along. If you hear some noise, the kitchen's finally being installed. So now that we're down a little bit from lockdown, we will have a kitchen. So I'm very happy.
Well, I feel like a kitchen is very necessary during lockdown, so that's exciting. So as I mentioned earlier, we're talking about the non-traditional media landscape. And by this, I mean media opportunities that are outside of traditional magazines. So I'm noticing an influx of magazine editors joining brand teams or helping brands create their own editorial content. Anna and Meeghan, you guys are both great examples of editors moving from a traditional magazine to an e-retailer or trade brand. So it's proving to be a growing field of editorial opportunities. Do you guys think, and I guess we'll start off with Meeghan and Anna first, but would you say that this is perhaps the fastest growing field of editorial opportunities?
Anna, do you want to go first? Or do you want me to go? Okay.
Yeah, I can go. So I was thinking about this question when you were saying it, and I don't necessarily know if it's the fastest growing, but it is certainly the new frontier of the media landscape. I think as traditional media kind of reaches this tipping point with advertising dollars and kind of figuring out how to make their models more sustainable and profitable, brands are looking for new opportunities. They're looking for new places to go and share their stories, and they're kind of realizing that they can do that themselves in-house. And it's exciting to watch that happen and to see these brands find their voices and hire people that know how to kind of channel those voices into really great content. And it's exciting to be a part of. Like I said, it's a new frontier. It's the Wild West, and brands like One Kings Lane and Schumacher have been doing it for a while, but people are still finding new ways to do it, and they're really trying out different things, and it kind of feels like a really energetic, fun time to be a part of this whole new frontier of what media could be.
Yeah, just to follow on with that, I totally agree with what Anna's saying. And I would say that our experience at Schumacher isn't, I wouldn't say that it necessarily feels like it's the fastest growing sector for editorial, but we just haven't found like any end in sight, you know, like we, it just sort of feels like there's room for lots of different people at the table, which really excites us. We don't want to be the only game in town. Everybody has like a voice and a point of view to contribute. You know, the deeper we get into it, the more and more opportunity we discover for telling stories and connecting with people and just, you know, creating things to inspire decorators and people who love decorating. So it doesn't seem like there's any end in sight.
I've loved it. I really enjoy seeing everything that you guys are creating. And from the rest of the group, Michael and Eddie, I'd love to hear from you guys too. Would you say that editorial opportunities, I like to think of them not so much dwindling, but more shifting in a different way? Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, Kayla. I think, you know, sadly, the traditional print media has been going through a hard time. I mean, it started with the internet, and it's only been accelerated by coronavirus. But I think people's need for information and inspiration, they want to hear the stories. So they're going to different ways of finding that. Instagram has been a huge, you know, influence on, use the term influencer, it's been a huge influence on everybody and how people get ideas. So it's not surprising that brands would want to engage people who know how to tell stories, pick the distinctive image, create the distinctive image, you know, that's going to make them stand out, because the media landscape for print has shrunk, but it's only gotten larger in the rest of the world with you know, there's so many outlets for information. So anything you can do that will stand out is going to be helpful. And I think editorial training is, you know, and I'm happy that 2 of the 3 other panelists I worked with on my editorial career, so great. You know, that kind of editorial training, I think, is such an advantage, even in this new landscape.
Absolutely. Well, what I was going to say to what Michael was saying is, you know, for us opening up our photography studio and prop house, that we're able to generate creative content editorial just like we would working as in a magazine, but for these smaller businesses, larger businesses, whatever they're looking for to help them tell their story, where it's so important to have great content for Instagram, Facebook, website, beautiful photography for, you know, the need. And I definitely think that editorial background has, now we're not just working for one brand, we're able to work with different brands and help them tell stories.
Right.
Well, that's funny, because that's exactly what I was going to ask you, Eddie. You work with a number of different brands. So what are some of those brands that you're helping create content for?
Well, Eddie Bauer, I mean, we have Lily Pulitzer, we have still working with the magazines, HGTV, Better Homes and Gardens, House Beautiful, Addison Weeks, Couture Lamps, New York Wallpaper, Bassett McNabb. So it's been great to work with these companies coming out to Pennsylvania. And when you say Pennsylvania, it's an hour and a half. It was,
yeah, I was going to,
it's less than going up to our house that we had up in Washington, Connecticut from New York. So, you know, sometimes from when I lived on the Upper East Side, it would take an hour and 15 minutes to get to Brooklyn. So, you know, what's another couple minutes on the train? So, yeah, I think it's definitely been able to open up, you know, opportunities to work with multiple clients, especially now during this time where, you know, social distancing, not being able to have these huge setups where clients can send their product to us. We work it out, you know, with Zoom and, you know, it makes life easy.
Certainly. Are there any other brands, Meeghan or Anna, would you have you noticed are picking up on this trend, or certainly early adapters? I would say Schumacher and One King's Lane, obviously.
Yeah, I was actually working, so our 11-year anniversary was in April, and I was working on a retrospective story about the beginnings of One King's Lane and kind of where we have been over the 11 years. And certainly there have been a lot of different iterations, and we've grown as a brand, but it was interesting to see, and like digging back through and reporting out the story, like reading old employee books and employee manuals and talking to people, that the editorial DNA has been there since the beginning, you know. And I think it's companies like One King's Lane and like Schumacher who have really, they've cornered in on that market, and they're like, this is something that we know we can do. Our audiences are engaged. Like, they might not be as big as a shelter publication, but they are definitely as engaged, if not more so engaged, because they are coming to you just for that. So I definitely think that One King's Lane and Schumacher are early adapters and kind of have paved the way for this new frontier.
I remember being on staff and having meetings being like, look at what One King's Lane is doing. Look at what Schumacher is doing. And they have, you know, a tight team, and they're doing such great things. Like, how are they doing it? And, you know, here we are, we had these big staffs at the magazine. So I would definitely say you guys were trailblazers in it.
Well, I think one of the problems with the traditional magazine, you know, the whole setup is advertising had to pay for so much of the cost, and advertising therefore became very, very expensive, and a lot of brands couldn't afford the ads to get their story out there. So that's one, you know, they used to have what they called custom content, and they were inserts in magazines or separate magazines. But now, I think if you look at so many of the people sell online, retail sells online, but they, you know, Resto is the biggest version of that, with those giant catalogs that they send out. But, you know, Serena and Lily's catalog looks like a magazine, Pottery Barn, Williams-Sonoma, they all take on the gloss of that, because it creates a world and a vision where the reader can sort of visualize themselves if they buy that sofa or buy those drapes or whatever it might be. So I think it's something they can control, and it's a lot less expensive than buying ads in all the shelter magazines.
Yeah, and I think to Michael's point also, I know for us with the Bulletin, which we've been producing twice a year, that's been like one of the really kind of like revelations for us that's like really unfettered us, is because it's not solely dependent on advertisers. So we can do whatever we want. And we've, you know, it's the Bulletin started really organically. We never planned for it to be a magazine. It was actually just the first one was marketing collateral for the First Miles Red collection that we had. Derek Caponegri, our creative director, thought it would be fun to just do like a broadsheet, like an old-fashioned broadsheet, and do kind of editorial stories about Miles, because he's just so interesting, and it really hit a chord. And we were like, all right, well, let's see what happens if we do another one. And so it's just evolved. And for us, we've actually evolved to the point where like now we're way more editorial than we were. Like when it first started, we were like, okay, this is like, you know, editorial because we all have magazine backgrounds, but it's Schumacher. It has to be about Schumacher product, right? And now, you know, we're, you know, as you said earlier, Kayla, we're in the middle of producing our 11th issue. And we've gotten to the point where the vast majority of our stories have nothing to do about Schumacher. They don't feature any Schumacher product. It's really gone in the direction of like true editorial. But because we are not tethered to being solely dependent on advertisers, we're kind of free to really make whatever stories we want. And that's been really fun. And it's been fun to offer that to the decorating community too, you know, and just be able to kind of like do these big love letters to decorating twice a year in a way that, you know, toward the end of all of our print careers, we weren't able to do because, you know, the budgets were just too tight. And yeah, it's been really fun.
Well, and I should also note, side note, if any of you guys have questions during this, please enter them in the questions at the bottom of your screen, and then we can address these at the end of the panel. And then Michael, congratulations on the Cherish podcast launch. That's awesome. I was listening to some ones today and listened to it a month or so ago. It's been really great. So congrats. How's it been going so far?
I never thought I'd host a podcast, but
yeah, new media.
Different, I mean, especially for someone who hates the sound of their own voice, it's been a bit of a transition, but it's all good, and people seem to be enjoying it, so that's great.
Yeah. Well, and then
because you had asked me about how it got started, and when Cherish bought Deering Hall, which the website I've been working with, they wanted to integrate everything, not surprisingly. But one of the things that they really wanted to do was to reach a designer market, and they realized that a focused podcast about designers' issues, and this was pre-corona crisis, which we've done several episodes about that. But we started out with like, should you do a show house, or how do you get a fabric line with one of the companies, that kind of thing. So that's how we started out, and the response has been great, and it helps Cherish to emphasize to designers that they really want to work with them on a more intensive basis.
And how have you been using your experience from Elle Decor and Martha Stewart Living and applying that to Cherish?
Well, the good thing about working at those magazines was I have talked to lots and lots of designers over the years. And I, going to events like LCDQ or the What's New, What's Next at 200 Lex, you run into a lot of designers. I know designers are friends, whatever. So you hear about the problems, the day-to-day. And that's what the podcast focuses on, to try and deal with real issues, as opposed to the history of design or, does green go with blue, whatever. It's really more about business issues, creative issues, that kind of thing. So, my whole background was about that, asking what do people want to know, what are their issues, and then also it's allowed me to meet a lot of really talented designers whose work I admire so much, and that was a great joy of working at Elle Decor, especially, and Martha too, when I got to meet Eddie.
Yeah. And then Anna and Meeghan, so when you guys are working on editorial content for your brands, is the editorial submission and planning process, how is that similar or maybe different than how you were working at Traditional Home or Hearst Design Group?
Meeghan, if you want
to. I can say quickly for us that it is, it's actually pretty much the same at this point. It is really kind of, it was a very small team when we first started doing it, and now everyone wears a few different hats on the creative services marketing team at Schumacher, but we have like a core group who work together on the bulletin. We also have a blog that's driven by Editorial that's called The Edit, and Tori Malott has been driving all of our social. So those platforms are all starting to kind of talk even more together. So I think that's new for us, and that wasn't happening when I was working at traditional print magazines. So the integration of those platforms, but in terms of the planning of the editorial stories, it's a similar, familiar process that we love.
Yeah, I would echo that. And I think our process is pretty much the exact same as it would be at any other publication. You get projects that you want to review, like home tours, for example, and I either send a call out to my publicist friends that I know and like, hey, I'm looking for projects, or I go through my inbox, and those go through a similar vetting process where I present them to our creative director and the editorial team. And it's the same like it was at any other magazine before. You have to go through these processes and vet things out. And, at One Kings Lane, like we're working with the same brands that I worked with as an editor. We're working with Visual Comfort and Jaliska and Ralph Lauren and all of those things. So it's the same relationships and it's the same processes, just turned a little bit on its head because we're coming at it from a brand perspective. But really, it's pretty much the exact same. Our calendar, I create our calendar, and our calendar is done seasonally, months ahead. So I think like back in March, I was planning out the entire calendar for summer basically up until Labor Day, but obviously things have changed, you know, like the world changed. So, but I mean, you plan out far in advance, and it is digital, and we typically have 3 to 4 stories a week. So things can change around, things can switch up, but as far as our processes of intaking information and kind of the nitty gritty, it's basically the same.
Okay. And then Eddie, you're hired from or by brands to style shoots, create beautiful photography at Maximalist Studios. In public relations, we're always stressing the importance of good quality photography. So from your perspective, can you explain the value of good photography, and what are your clients using? Like how do they use the photography that they're getting from you?
Well, I think, you know, clients are coming to us because it is full service, or it could be whatever the client's needs are. I mean, they can come to me and say, okay, we have this new collection and this is kind of what we're thinking. And then I can help collaborate on coming up with the full concept down to shooting it and sending off the images. But I really think like right now, like the photography is so key. And I mean, people do a really great job with iPhones and, you know, but I think there is an art, and coming from the editorial world, it's not just like throwing something down and taking a picture of it. It's, you know, everything that goes into it, the color, the background, the backdrop, the props, you know, when you're taking the picture of the product, you want the product that you're shooting to stand out and not the props to overwhelm the product you're trying to sell. And I just think there's such a key way of doing that, especially for home product, that, you know, there's an art to it. And I think that's why, you know, people are coming to us with their product for that editorial point of view.
I love that you highlight the image focuses on the product you're trying to sell, because I feel like a lot of people from like the design background or the brands, you'll post this beautiful image of, say, a table lamp, and there's always that one person that's like, where'd you get that tiny box in the corner? And it's like, really?
You're like, it's a prop.
And Michael, you've had some really great, impressive clients on the Cherish podcast. I saw Courtney Coleman from Brockschmidt and Coleman was there recently.
Right.
The Carriers, Sheila Bridges. Are you leaning on some of the same people that you frequently worked with at Elle Decor, or, you know, what makes a good podcast guest for you?
Absolutely. No,
yeah.
Absolutely. But, you know, one of the things that was interesting going from print to Deering Hall was to realize how many talented designers there are across the country that I was totally not aware of. You know, when I was at Elle Decor, we had so many submissions, and it's a New York-based thing. You know, you knew a lot of people in New York, but things would come into me. But to realize how varied the design world is across the country and how much talent there is was really inspiring. And one of the things about doing the podcast, we do it in a studio in New York, but of course we've had to scramble because of this. So now we send out a special microphone and earphones to people and have to get there in time and all this, and have to give them a little tutorial on how to make it work. But it's opened up the whole country in terms of guests. So, you know, more and more I'll be featuring people that I don't know as well or whatever, but whose work I like and whatever, and I feel are appropriate to the subject. But the digital realm, the great thing about it is it's so flexible and quick. Like one of the things that Cherish did recently, because so many of the trade shows were canceled, including High Point and LCDQ, a lot of brands didn't have the chance to make their spring introductions the way they wanted. So Anna Brockway, the co-founder of Cherish with her husband Greg, came up with this idea that we would do an online virtual trend report where they had the Cherish trend market editors go out and see what the trends were. And we worked with an editor from AD and me and Anna, and we went on and did this. And then they followed up with videos from specific brands like Waterworks. Here was their latest introduction by the Gachos, their new lines, whatever. So it was a way to try and support our brands. And then actually the Design Leadership Network did much the same thing, creating a sort of visual magazine. We don't want to call it a magazine, but kind of featuring all the introductions by their partners. And that's now going to continue and become almost like a quarterly report on members' doings, you know, whether it's an architecture, an interior, or what the brands are doing, because there is such a need and desire for this information and to make it sure it reaches the right audience.
All right. I attended the Cherish presentation. It was really good. I enjoyed it.
You never know who's there. That's a weird thing, but as opposed to in person, where you can have a drink.
I mean, I think they should continue doing this. A lot of these broadcasts, I think, will be done.
Yeah, they're going to do actually on outdoor next month, because, it's funny, usually outdoor is March, is the season for outdoor furniture and everything, but I don't know if you've tried to buy any outdoor furniture recently, as I have, because we have a new patio. Everything is sold out because all the shipments were delayed. So, everything comes from China or overseas. So it's been interesting. So they're actually very late introductions of outdoor this year. So in June, we're doing it. Similar.
Cool. And then Anna and Meeghan, when you're deciding, what, we've heard about the submission process, but when you're deciding what editorial things to feature, you guys both work with brands who have product themselves. So are you looking for other product opportunities that maybe for Schumacher could be non-competing, or are you looking more so for designer features?
You mean when we're putting together editorial stories? Like if it's a product story, are we looking for other?
Right. Are you looking for product, designers, or maybe a mix of both?
For us with the bulletin at this point, we actually really approach it as if it's an editorial magazine. In fact, a few issues ago, we started distinguishing its voice separate from Schumacher. So you'll notice, I mean, it's probably just us who really notice, but if you're reading an issue, you'll see that like when we're talking about Schumacher product, we don't actually say, our new, or, like we have this. We refer to it as Schumacher. Because for us, the bulletin has a distinct editorial voice. So for us now, really, when we're putting together editorial lineups, we'll definitely like see what Schumacher has coming out in the next few months. And we have new product that launches every month, and an insanely talented design studio. So we definitely like look to that to see what's coming out, to see if there's anything beautiful that we want to build a story around. And, they always, not always, but often our marquee collections are always, kind of expressing sort of like what our design director and creative director kind of like feel is like in the zeitgeist. So we'll look to that, but then we'll really just approach it as if we were an editorial team. And look for things that are sparking our interests as editors, more so than people who have to sell products line.
Yeah, I definitely think that's the best way to approach these kinds of stories. I think for me personally, and for One Kings Lane, like our real bread and butter stories are our home tours and our designer features and our how-tos. Those are the ones that people come to us for, they love, and they will share and Instagram and just kind of share all over the place. And I think it's really wonderful that we get to be this place of inspiration for them. And, our how-to stories are really interesting. I personally love those service journalism pieces because it allows us to kind of tap into the community. It allows us to tap into designers that we work with, or designers that we want to work with, or our own in-house design team. We have an interior design team that works just for One Kings Lane that helps customers and things like that. And so those kinds of stories are really our bread and butter that people love. And I've been at One Kings Lane for about a year now, and I have tried to kind of push a new product kind of story vibe for us, because it's interesting to kind of lead and teach the team to kind of be like, okay, we can sell product and it's our product, but at the same time, we want to be an editorial voice. So I've started introducing like affiliate marketing links and things like that to kind of introduce other product in the way. And of course, there's always going to be a balance of what do we sell, what do we not sell. But as Meeghan was saying, I think that coming from a place of this is the story that I want to tell, not the product I want to sell, is really a key way to make your editorial content something that people are interested in.
That's a great way to say it, Anna.
I like that saying.
It's authentic. Like it's not salesy.
Yeah, exactly. And like you'll cover stories like, oh, here's our, like you were saying, like our outdoor collection. You will of course talk about our outdoor collection and our launch and things like that. But those stories will come from a place of, okay, this is what we think, or what our editorial team thinks is the product that we're loving this season, and here's what we envision our outdoor season living to look like, you know, and it comes from that place of editorial eye meets product, and marriage is really there in the middle to kind of get the product that you need to get, but then also tell a story that comes first.
Sure. And then shifting focus a little bit, Eddie, I saw that on social media you had 60 Minutes come to Maximalist Studio and record
Yes.
an interview. That's amazing. So
Yes.
can you explain yourself there?
Sure, well,
How did that come about?
Well, with the studio, it's, you know, it's 10,000 square feet. We have a 3,000 square foot prop house, and it's a large space where people could socially distance. And so we were Googling studios, and they found us. And it's kind of one of those things where, you know, yes, this whole Corona thing is awful, but it is opening up opportunities for other, you know, for people. And like for us, it was, they found us because it was a large studio. It was an hour and a half away from New York, and we had the full prop house. So they came in, and Scott Pelley was there for the full day interviewing all of his people he was interviewing. And it was kind of one of those things, like, in all this awfulness that's happening, like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening right now.
Very cool. I love that.
Yeah, and the studio too is, it's, people can rent the studio as is, and we are not even involved in it. It's just a studio rental fee. And I mean, we have Urban always rents the studio. I mean, when they need extra space, terrain. So it's not just us doing the photography and styling. It's open to whoever wants to come and shoot.
Right. And I've been there. It's huge. So there's definitely room to socially distance.
Definitely.
And then, Michael, let me ask you, I heard there was possibly a Cherish magazine launching later this year. Are there any details you can share about that?
Not a lot of details, but I do know they're working on one. The original plan was to have it out for the fall. I don't know if Corona has delayed it. They're doing it out of San Francisco. And I was advised a little at the beginning, but they're out there. But I can say that the main editor on it is someone else who I had the pleasure of working with on during my long and distinguished journalism career. So I know it will be quite good.
Exciting.
That's so funny. I mean, very relevant for the topic.
You know, it's, people want something to hold in their hands, and
absolutely.
You know,
and we really see it as like being part of a microcosm, you know, that there's like there's room for everybody at the table, and you know, yeah.
Totally.
And with that being said too, I think, you know, the shelter magazines, there are so few of them right now that, you know, there's only so many projects that they can publish because of ad sales, that there are, and Michael, you were saying how many great interior designers there are out there. It is opening the opportunity for these smaller designers that are just as talented as the larger designers to get their work published and get out there.
Yeah, and Kayla, I know something that you and I have talked about over drinks and just in our friendship has been, you know, I think it's really informing these publicists and designers who aren't really sure about these non-traditional media outlets and how they work. And it's kind of showing them that these outlets are great outlets to work with. They will get you press. They will show you a whole new audience. And like, that's really why I'm calling it a new frontier, because it's a new way for people to do business. And these people who had their heart sets on shelter magazines, those spaces just don't exist as much anymore. And it's these new creative outlets that people are creating that are really gonna give them the opportunity to put their name out there that they've been looking for.
I 100% agree. And then since you guys are now all working for different brands and still doing editorial work, can each of you, and we can go around in a circle, you know, whoever goes first, doesn't matter, but can each of you guys name either like one brand or one person that you've discovered after your magazine editorial days?
Yeah, I've been following this UK brand. It's called Toast. I don't know if any of you are familiar with them, but they're like a lifestyle brand. They're fashion, home, decor, all of this kind of stuff. And they're really about soft, organic minimalism. So not completely my aesthetic, but an aesthetic I appreciate. And their editorial content is really interesting. They have a podcast, they have a blog, and their blog is really done, and this is like inside baseball, but the interface is really simple and just like very clean. And it almost feels like you're stumbled upon a blog spot from 2008, but in a really like elegant way. And I really like it because it feels personal and it feels like you're just reading someone's really good thoughts. But then their content is varied. They're a lifestyle brand. So they have like a book club, and they also have, you know, fashion trend reports, and they have home stories. So I've discovered them about a year ago, and I've enjoyed watching them kind of grow and how their editorial content has evolved over the last year.
Very cool. So a brand. Perfect. And anyone else want to?
Well,
Sure.
I sort of discovered, I knew the designer Brad Ford during my years at Elle Decor, but he started a thing called Field and Supply in Kingston, New York, where he had makers all come. And from that, he's then opened a showroom at 200 Lex in the New York Design Center. But, you know, so Field and Supply is an amazing thing. It was held first in the spring, then they opened the fall version. Of course, it's been delayed due to coronavirus. But one of the things that Brad did, and I actually had him on the podcast, is he now has on Instagram what's called a maker's moment, where all the incredibly talented and stylish makers, whether ceramics, furniture, whatever, he features little mini profiles of them and asks them different questions like, what would you do if you weren't a maker? What would you? And it's fascinating. And it's another creative way of getting the message out there when you can't do it live or you can't necessarily do it in print. And I just think it's incredibly impressive.
I love that. I heard on the podcast too, and he said it was actually not that difficult to pull together.
Yes, exactly.
Well, even like the power of a hashtag. I mean, Michael, that makes me think also of like, you know, like Brimfield. Also, sorry, there's like phones ringing in the background. But you know, Brimfield, you know, kind of went haywire this year, and through various hashtags, people were able to like shop virtually online. And I know that Trade Secrets did something similar, and that's just like so interesting to me to kind of see how people are really like finding ways to still connect and still, you know, kind of like get the message out about cool stuff and find cool stuff. I know I also have like been really paying attention to zines and like smaller indie brands because there's all this digital capability available to all of us now. People are able to do really interesting things without a giant budget. So Whalebone is this like indie magazine that I've been kind of obsessed with. And Wild Sam is this like independent sort of travel guide brand that is just doing really beautiful marketing. So yeah, it's exciting to see what everybody's doing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we'll definitely hit on the point of like Brimfield and getting that antique kind of thrifting out there, which, you know, with all the online auctions now, it's really, that's what I've been following. And also like the online auctions are almost, they're creating content now with the product that is in the sale too. I mean, Christie's does it, Doyle does it, but then also all these smaller, auctions all over the United States now are curating this product and in an editorial way, which is really interesting to see, that entices you to click on and now, you know, buy instead of just showing silo products of what's going to be sold.
For sure. Yeah. So, and just to kind of wrap this up, so I'm checking the time here and I want to make sure we have some time for questions, but I'd love just to get your final thoughts for the panelists. What in your opinion does the future of media look like? And this is actually one of our questions as well, for designers or people who are making product, if they are, what's your recommendation to these folks if they want to pitch a story and garner some online content?
Well, I think that like one of the things that I learned in traditional print magazines early on is more relevant than ever and goes directly to what Eddie's doing is good photographs. Like, you know, and you said it too, Kayla. I think
agree.
that's like,
Totally.
It's really necessary.
And we did a podcast on do you need a publicist? And I had 3 publicists on for designers. And they all agreed, before you hire a publicist, make sure you have good photography.
We say that too, because we can't do a lot, and it's hard to tell a story unless you have a beautiful photograph that almost tells a story for you.
Exactly.
And what I was going to say is make it all, and it needs to be authentic to the company that we're working for, to the company or the product that is being sold. Like, yes, you can sell a copper pot, but you know, it's nicer, it's easier to sell an editorial story about that pot, you know, or about where it's made, and tell that in those images.
Yeah,
Like a story behind a brand.
Yep.
Yeah, and like I was saying earlier, I think print media isn't dying, it's just evolving, but in this evolution, designers need to turn to other outlets sometimes. You know, they need to turn to people like Meeghan and I who can tell their stories, or Eddie and Michael who can tell their stories. And I think that is kind of sometimes hard for them to maybe wrap their minds around, that, oh, these other outlets are just as viable as a shelter publication. And I think that should be a big takeaway from this panel, is that there are ways for you to tell your story that aren't just through the 4 or 5 shelter magazines that exist anymore. And photography is a very important part of that, because we also don't have the budget to go out and shoot beautiful things. I mean, we can, but it's less of an incentive for us. And so I think that really, really trying to get your brand voice out there is important, and doing it through new and inventive ways is how you're going to be able to be successful.
Absolutely.
Sure. I almost think of Eddie as like the first step to get that beautiful photography. And then you take it to Anna or Meeghan or Michael.
It is the key element. And I mean, I remember, you know, sitting at my desk getting, you know, product being like, can you get this into the magazine? And you're looking at it and you're like, well, I can't really tell what it is. Like, is it wood? Is it silver? Like, what is it? Like, and that's a key. I mean, as soon as you get an image that's like beautiful product, you're like, oh my God, put it right on your board. Like, I'm going to pitch this.
Yeah.
Right. Or some of our clients who make product and they're like, oh, this is not that great of a seller. I'm always like, well, let me see the imagery, because is it not a good seller, or do you just see better images of it?
It's true.
So we have someone who asked a question here. They said, if you were launching a wallpaper brand, what non-traditional media outlets would you suggest they approach? Sorry, it's kind of putting you on the spot there.
You know, I think it comes to, if you're going to do non-traditional media outlets, like someone,
perhaps.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep.
Well, I was going to say that if it's an outlet that's not necessarily selling your story, like if it's a One King's Lane or if it's a Schumacher, I mean, it's all about the story behind the brand. So really honing on what that story is and marketing yourself as a maker, and then taking it to someone like Michael or Meeghan or I and being like, I have a really cool story and a cool product line, but let me tell you about like my story and the history behind this product and why it's engaging.
And I would say also that, you know, even for the traditional print magazines that do still exist, that their digital platforms are getting more and more and more robust. Yeah. And that, you know, like if you can't get something into the print edition, like do not poo-poo the power of like a blog story or Instagram posts, or, you know, I think those things are just like, you know, have more and more power behind them.
Well, the nice thing about online is you can click and buy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And also you're getting, like, on a blog post or an Instagram post, you're hitting a target market that, you know, if you're giving it to a social media influencer who loves the product genuinely, that, you know, they're talking about it authentically, that gets out to their following, is the reason why the people are following them, because of their taste and what they love. So, you know.
And I think you can also learn a lot if you look at, especially on Instagram, if you look at brands or people who you really respect, who's following them, you know, and who are they following? Like that also can sometimes be an interesting conduit to other really valuable outlets that you may not have already known about.
I would agree. I also like to get product in the hands of people that I admire, whether it's an editor or an influencer, and say, you play with this and see how it works out. Like document the process of putting the wallpaper up. Or we worked with Hadley Keller at House Beautiful a couple weeks ago on wallpapering her closet doors and doing a DIY project here during the days of COVID. So, and that was really interesting and exciting for us. Looking at a couple other questions here. Let's see. We have someone wanting to know, where do you guys see all the luxury regional magazines and the print industry going from an advertising perspective, since online and custom brand publishing seems to be flourishing? This is probably talking more about like sponsored versus non-sponsored content too. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think regional magazines are going to be more important than ever. I think they're better than ever.
I agree.
They have better, with the shrinkage of the national shelter magazines, the regional ones are offered better content than they probably did get before. And also, you know, I just bought a house a year and a half ago in Connecticut. I'm reading all the Connecticut magazines. So if I'm a designer or I have a shop or something in that area, I would definitely advertise or try and get a story into those publications, because I think it reaches a very immediate audience, and it's certainly less expensive than advertising in a national magazine.
But yeah, and just with that said, you are getting those clients. Like it's pinpointing those clients.
They're primed to buy. I mean, I started my career at a smaller regional magazine, and it was, I mean, I don't know, we had like, it was like a small regional, 3 or 4 states in Georgia. And that magazine, we had, I don't know, a couple thousand readers, but at the same time, those were the people who wanted to hire the interior designers that we were working with, you know, like Chanel James was part of our magazine, and like that was the beginning of it all for a lot of those designers. And these people need these springboards of smaller magazines. And like you guys were saying, I do think they are going to be fine and weather the storm of media, because they're going to be the ones that people see that they can buy from, and they're primed to purchase from those smaller outlets.
Before like Instagram and so much social media, I mean, I definitely dating myself, but I would use those, you know, Connecticut Cottages and Gardens, all of these as a resource for getting projects to publish in the national, because it hits such a tiny little market that, you know, they really are, they get really great local projects.
And they're so dialed in. They're so much more dialed in to the local scene.
Absolutely. And yes.
I also feel like they're a little less intimidating for some, like if I was someone who wanted to hire an interior designer, I would feel more comfortable reaching out to someone in my regional publication than a huge national, because I might feel intimidated reaching out to someone in a big national magazine, or they don't have time for me, or they might be so expensive, or that's those like first outreach scaries kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, looking at a couple other questions. I think we have time for maybe one more. Oh, this is interesting. Someone wants to know, it's a little bit not necessarily related to magazines, but are there any nonprofits that you guys are really liking or supporting during COVID?
Well,
maybe any brands that have been doing a good job at supporting nonprofits.
Well, actually, this is interesting, because I've been a longtime supporter of Housing Works since too many decades to talk about, you know, and they do Design on a Dime as their big fundraiser every year, which had to be postponed. It was supposed to be in April. So I'm involved with them, and they've just started a whole homeless COVID to hotels that they're running for homeless people with COVID-19. But they recently had a fundraiser which Benjamin Moore supported, where they matched up to $25,000. So in lieu of that, and they're trying to do Design on a Dime in the fall. But anyway, that's my COVID-19.
Nice. I love how our Design on a Dime. It's definitely missed this season, but hopefully it'll be alive and well in the fall.
A lot of money for them, so they're hurting a bit because of that.
I would say Meals on Wheels right now, for like all the, you know, older people that have been, you know, shut in, that can't get out. Like they're doing such great things.
Totally.
Yeah. And I also think a couple of weeks ago, you know, Christina Juarez had our caftan challenge for, I'm sure we all saw it across our Instagram feeds, and Bunny Williams got involved, and John Mazzelli. And I think, I mean, that's a great organization, the Boys and Girls Club in Kips Bay. and all the food banks. But it's been really cool to see how the design community has come together during this time to support the people that we would be supporting through events or galas or things like that. I think it's been really wonderful to see, and even how just the independent designers have been doing stuff, raising money for food bank in New York and things like that. So it's been really interesting and cool to watch the community come together for that.
And you see so many.
I think
And
Christina
again, I
might be
think-
doing part 2, so get your caftans ready. Dust them off
I
for
think
your
also
summer
like
clothes.
powering, like the power of the hashtag, like even like how much like sort of like enthusiasm and engagement Christina was able to generate for that. And I know that Charlotte Moss has been doing stuff for different, kind of like food initiatives, hunger initiatives. So it is just really great to see, people just finding ways to pitch in and do something meaningful together.
Yeah. All right, well, I think that's pretty much everything. I don't want to keep you guys for too much longer, but I really appreciate your time today and talking to us about this kind of new landscape of what's going on. I will, for everyone who's watching or maybe didn't have a chance to watch, or you have any friends that do want to watch this later, it is recorded. So we will post the recording afterwards, and we can link that on Instagram and on the website and all of those good things. So thank you guys so much. I will wrap this up. You guys have a nice Thursday and soon to be Memorial Day weekend.
Memorial Day weekend. Hard to believe it's here.
Yeah.
I know. So good to see everyone. It's
Really
so
great to see you guys.
I know.
Bye, guys.
All right.
Thank
take
you.
care.
Take
Thank
care.
you. Bye.
Thanks.